Blood and Honor, a tale of loyalty, betrayal, and the price of broken promises. Chapter 1. The Crosshairs of Memory. William Mitchell had never missed a target in his 20-year career. Not once. Through the mountains of Afghanistan, the urban sprawl of Iraq, and the shadowy conflicts that never made headlines, his rifle had spoken with deadly precision 43 times. Each shot had found its mark, each contract fulfilled without question or hesitation. But now, crouched in the abandoned warehouse overlooking Maple Street, his weathered hands trembled for the first time since his rookie days in Kandahar. Through the loopholed scope of his Remington 700, he watched Robert Thompson move around his kitchen, making coffee like any other Tuesday morning in suburban Portland. The crosshairs settled just behind Bobby's left ear. The kill shot Bill had perfected over 2 decades of professional killing. Bobby Thompson, 48 years old, graying at the temples, carrying himself with the ramrod posture that marked every career military man Bill had ever known. 20 years flying F-16s for Uncle Sam, now reduced to piloting commuter flights for Pacific Northwest Airlines. A good man who'd made the mistake of marrying a woman half his age, a woman who'd caught the eye of someone with very deep pockets and very flexible morals. The rain drummed against the corrugated metal roof above Bill's position, each drop echoing like a distant gunshot in the empty space. Portland in November, gray skis, endless drizzle, and the kind of bone-deep chill that reminded a man of his mortality. Perfect weather for what some rich bastard had paid him $300,000 to do. Alexander Sterling, 38 years old, tech mogul worth north of $2 billion according to Forbes. The kind of man who'd grown up believing money could buy anything, including another man's wife, and apparently another man's death. What Sterling didn't know, what his background check had somehow missed, was that Bobby Thompson had once saved Bill Mitchell's life in a dusty valley outside Kabul. December 15, 2007. Bill could still taste the cordite and desert sand when he closed his eyes. Their unit had been providing overwatch for a convoy when the Taliban sprung their ambush. Coordinated fire from 3 positions, RPGs screaming overhead, the whole valley turned into a killing field in the space of 10 seconds. Bill had taken shrapnel in his right leg, gone down hard behind a boulder that offered about as much protection as tissue paper. That's when Bobby had come for him. Captain Robert Thompson, call sign Phoenix, could have called for immediate extraction, could have written off one wounded sniper and saved the rest of his men. Instead, he'd belly-crawled 300 yards through machine gun fire, dragged Bill's unconscious body to safety, and held off insurgents for 43 minutes until the cavalry arrived. "Never leave a man behind," Bobby had said later, pressing a field bandage against Bill's shredded thigh. "That's not just some Ranger motto, Mitchell. That's who we are." Bill's phone buzzed, jerking him back to the present. A text from Sterling. Timeline accelerated. Target elimination required today. Double fee for expedited service. The younger man had no patience, Bill reflected grimly. Everything had to happen on his schedule in his time frame. Rich boys never did learn to wait for anything. Through his scope, Bill watched Bobby pour his coffee into a worn ceramic mug, probably a gift from his wife, back when she still pretended to love him. Catherine Thompson, 33 years old, striking in that wholesome Midwestern way that made men think of Sunday mornings and apple pie. She'd been working Sterling's private jet as cabin crew when their affair started. How it began didn't matter now. What mattered was that she'd chosen sides, and her husband was standing in the way of her new life. Bill shifted position, bone and muscle protesting after 3 hours of stillness. The shot would be clean 190 yards, minimal wind, perfect angle through the kitchen window. Bobby would never know what hit him. One moment brewing coffee, the next moment meeting his maker. The grieving widow would comfort herself with Sterling's considerable resources, and Bill would be 200 miles away before the body cooled. But something was wrong with this picture. In 2 decades of killing, Bill had never hesitated once the target was acquired. never second-guessed a contract, never looked back after pulling the trigger. Professional killers who developed consciences didn't stay in business long, they ended up in prison or in early graves. Through the scope, Bobby moved to the window, steam rising from his coffee cup. His face bore the same expression Bill remembered from those long watches in the Hindu Kush, alert, thoughtful, carrying the weight of responsibility that never quite left career officers, even in retirement. It was the face of a man who'd never broken faith with his brothers in arms. "God damn it," Bill whispered, lowering the rifle. He couldn't do it, not like this, not to Bobby. Pulling a composition notebook from his tactical pack, Bill began writing with fingers that still shook slightly. "Captain Thompson, this is official notification. You have 7 days. I know about your mother in the care facility. Handle her arrangements. Close your affairs. Don't attempt to run or hide. You know I'll find you anywhere. You taught me that real men don't abandon their brothers. I'm giving you this week because of what you did in Kandahar. It's all I can offer. Respectfully, W. Mitchell." He sealed the note in a plain envelope, no return address. Bobby's evening routine never varied. 5-mile run through Laurelhurst Park, same route every night at 1800 hours. Military precision, even in civilian life. The note would be waiting on his windshield when he returned to his beat-up Ford pickup. One last look through the scope revealed Bobby settling into his recliner with the morning paper, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked older than his 48 years, the cost of carrying other people's burdens for 2 decades. He had no idea that in a few hours, his world would explode just as surely as that IED in Kandahar. Bill began breaking down his rifle with practiced efficiency, each component fitting into its designated slot in the case. His mind was already calculating the next phase. Bobby Thompson wouldn't run, that wasn't his nature. He'd stand and fight, try to take control of the situation. It's what Marines did when backed into a corner. The rain intensified as Bill prepared to leave his position, fat droplets beating against the metal roof like an irregular drumbeat. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the Pacific, promising storms ahead. But the real storm was just beginning, and before it passed, blood would flow and accounts would be settled. Bill shouldered his gear and headed for the exit, leaving behind the moral certainty that had sustained him through 20 years of killing. Some lines, once crossed, changed a man forever. Today, he discovered that even professional killers had limits. What he didn't know was that Bobby Thompson, upon receiving his note, wouldn't prepare to die. Instead, the old Marine would begin hunting the hunter, and the man who taught him never to abandon a brother was about to learn that lesson worked both ways. Chapter 2: The Flight Attendant's Choice. Catherine Thompson had always prided herself on being a good wife. She cooked Bobby's favorite meals, kept their modest Portland home spotless, and never complained about the smell of aviation fuel that seemed permanently embedded in his work clothes. For 12 years, she'd played the part of the devoted military spouse, then the supportive airline pilot's wife. She'd thought it would be enough. But standing in the first-class cabin of Sterling Industries' Gulfstream G650, arranging crystal glasses on silver service trays, while Alexander Sterling's eyes tracked her every movement, Kate felt something stirring inside her that she'd thought was dead forever. At 33, she was still young enough to dream of a different life, still beautiful enough to catch the attention of a man who could offer her the world. Sandy Walsh, the senior flight attendant, brushed past her with practiced efficiency. "Girl, you need to decide what you want," she murmured under her breath. "Because standing on the sidelines isn't going to get you anywhere except back to that ranch house in Gresham with a man who talks more to his aircraft manuals than to his wife." Kate's hands trembled slightly as she arranged the champagne flutes. Sandy wasn't wrong. The past year had been a study in growing apart, Bobby lost in his routines and memories, she trapped in a life that felt smaller each day. When Sandy had gotten her this position with Sterling's private aviation company, it had seemed like a chance to see something of the world beyond Oregon's rain-soaked suburbs. She hadn't counted on Alex Sterling himself. "Mrs. Thompson." His voice was warm honey over steel, the tone of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Could you join me for a moment?" Professional protocol demanded she maintain proper distance from passengers, especially ones who owned the airline. But the rules seemed different at 35,000 feet, in the rarefied air where normal people like her weren't supposed to exist. Alex sat in his leather command chair, his dark hair slightly mussed from running his fingers through it, a habit she'd noticed during the 3 previous flights. He wore his wealth easily, without the desperate ostentation of new money. Everything about him spoke of power held with casual confidence. "I'll be direct," he said, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "I've been watching you for weeks. You're not happy." Kate felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Sterling, I hardly think my personal life is appropriate. It is when I'm thinking of offering you a position that goes far beyond serving drinks at altitude." He leaned forward, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her think of boardrooms and private clubs. "You're wasted in that suburban prison, Kate. A woman like you deserves more than a husband who peaked at captain and never had the vision to climb higher." The casual cruelty of his assessment should have angered her. Instead, she found herself nodding. "You don't know anything about my marriage." "I know enough." Alex's smile was predatory and charming in equal measure. "I know you married a war hero and got a tired, middle-aged man who'd rather read flight manuals than take you dancing. I know you lie awake at night wondering if this is all there is. I know you deserve better." Outside the aircraft windows, clouds drifted past like cotton balls against the endless blue. Up here, the mundane concerns of ground-level life seemed impossibly small and distant. Kate felt herself being drawn into Alex's orbit like debris around a black hole. "I have a proposal for you," he continued, his voice dropping to an intimate register. "Come work for me directly, not as cabin crew, as my personal assistant. Executive level, stock options, travel to places your airline pilot husband could never afford to take you. All you have to do is say yes." Kate knew this was about more than employment. The hunger in Alex's eyes was unmistakable, and answering it would cross a line she'd never imagined crossing. But sitting in the opulent cabin, surrounded by leather and crystal and the intoxicating scent of unlimited possibility, her old life felt like a faded photograph. "What about my husband?" she asked, adding how weak her voice sounded. "What about him?" Alex reached across and took her hand, his fingers warm and sure. "Kate, you can't live your whole life as someone else's supporting character. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to write your own story." The plane banked slightly, beginning its descent into McCarran International. Below them, Las Vegas sprawled like a neon fever dream across the desert. The city of second chances and reinvention. How perfect, Kate thought, that this conversation should happen here. When Alex kissed her, she didn't pull away. His lips were confident and demanding, nothing like Bobby's careful affection. This was a man who took what he wanted and never apologized for his appetites. For the first time in years, Kate felt truly alive. "I can give you everything," Alex whispered against her ear. "Penthouse in Manhattan, house in the Hamptons, travel anywhere in the world. Just say you're mine." Later, Kate would remember this moment as the instant her old life ended. Not when she said yes, that would come later, in the hotel suite Alex had waiting. But here, at 30,000 feet above the Nevada desert, when she chose desire over duty and passion over safety. She didn't know that her answer would set in motion a chain of events that would end in blood and betrayal. Didn't know that her husband was already marked for death by a man who'd once called him brother. Didn't know that some choices once made could never be unmade. All she knew was that Alexander Sterling was offering her the life she'd always dreamed of, and she was tired of being responsible Catherine Thompson, the good wife who never asked for more than she was given. "Yes," she whispered, sealing her fate with a single word. Outside the window, the lights of Las Vegas rushed up to meet them like fallen stars. Chapter 3: The Hunter's Gambit. The envelope lay on Bobby Thompson's kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. He'd been staring at it for 37 minutes, his untouched coffee growing cold in the Portland Timbers mug Kate had given him for their 10th anniversary. The neat handwriting was unmistakable: William Mitchell, call sign Deadeye, the best sniper Bobby had ever commanded, and the man whose life he'd saved in the mountains of Afghanistan 15 years ago. Bobby's fingers unconsciously traced the scar on his left forearm, a memento from the IED that had flipped his Humvee outside Kandahar, the same explosion that had given him a Purple Heart and 3 months of reconstructive surgery on his shoulder. Military life was full of ironies, but this one was particularly bitter. The man he'd saved from a Taliban ambush was now being paid to kill him. 7 days, he muttered, reading the note for the 4th time. Christ, Bill, what the hell got you into this mess? The tactical assessment came naturally, muscle memory from 2 decades of staying alive in hostile territory. 3 high-rise buildings to the north provided elevated firing positions. The abandoned industrial complex to the east offered cover and concealment. The water tower south of his neighborhood commanded perfect overwatch of his entire street. Any one of them could hide a sniper with Mitchell's skills. Bobby stood and moved to the living room window, staying well back from the glass. His eyes automatically began mapping sight lines and calculating angles. Old habits died hard in the core, paranoia kept you breathing. He studied every rooftop, every window, every shadow that could conceal a man with a rifle. Mitchell would be watching. Professional killers didn't give warnings without good reason, and Bill had always been thorough to the point of obsession. During their deployment, he'd spent hours studying terrain maps, calculating wind patterns, memorizing every detail of potential engagement zones. He never took a shot unless he was absolutely certain of the outcome. So why the warning? Why give his target a week to prepare? Bobby pulled his old Marine Corps footlocker from the bedroom closet, the brass fittings still gleaming despite their age. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay his service pistol, a Colt .45 that had never let him down in 3 tours of duty. Below that, his field glasses, tactical maps of the local area, and a leather journal filled with notes from his military days. He began planning like the Marine officer he'd once been. If Mitchell wanted a hunt, Bobby would give him one. But it wouldn't be the kind of one-sided execution bills anonymous employer was expecting. The next 3 days, Bobby established a routine that would seem normal to any observer but was actually calculated misdirection. Every morning at 6:30, he appeared at his kitchen window while making coffee. Every evening at 1800, he went for his 5-mile run through Laurelhurst Park. To any watcher, including a professional killer, he would appear to be a creature of predictable habits. What they wouldn't see were the motion sensors he'd positioned around his property, disguised as lawn sprinklers and garden lights, or the cameras he'd hidden in his neighbor's trees with their permission. Frank Kowalski next door was a retired Portland police detective who understood the gravity of the situation. Or the Kevlar vest Bobby wore under his running clothes, just in case Mitchell decided not to wait for the deadline. By the 4th day, Bobby had confirmed his suspicions. The abandoned warehouse on Industrial Boulevard showed signs of recent habitation, footprints in the dust, oil stains where someone had cleaned a rifle, cigarette butts from American Spirits, Mitchell's preferred brand since their Army days. The positioning was perfect for long-range surveillance of Bobby's house. "Still predictable as clockwork, you bastard," Bobby murmured, studying the warehouse through binoculars from his concealed position in Kowalski's attic. "Some things never change." He'd found Mitchell's hide, but confronting him directly would be suicide. Bill was too good at his job, and Bobby was 15 years removed from combat operations. Instead, he'd use Mitchell's professionalism against him. Snipers were creatures of routine, just like their targets. They observed, they planned, they waited for the perfect shot. Bobby intended to give him one. On the seventh day, as the sun set behind the Cascade Mountains, Bobby made his final preparations. The mannequin from Portland State University's theater department sat in his usual chair, positioned precisely where he sat every evening to read. Dressed in Bobby's old Marine sweatshirt and lit by the desk lamp, it would present a perfect silhouette to anyone watching through a rifle scope. Meanwhile, Bobby himself crouched in the shadows of the warehouse, having approached from the river side where Mitchell wouldn't expect company. He'd learned patience from the best, from Mitchell himself, during those long weeks of overwatch duty in Helmand Province. At 23:47 hours, Bill Mitchell climbed the warehouse stairs with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Bobby watched from the darkness as his former brother-in-arms assembled his rifle with practiced efficiency. Every movement was precise, economical, professional. The same hands that had once shared sea rations with Bobby now prepared to end his life. When Mitchell settled into his firing position, Bobby made his move. "Hello, Bill." The sniper froze, not from surprise but from recognition. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hands away from the rifle. "Should have known you wouldn't make it easy," Mitchell said quietly. "Hello, Captain." "It's just Bobby now, has been for 8 years. He stepped into Mitchell's peripheral vision, service pistol trained on center mass. "Want to tell me who's paying you to kill an old friend?" Mitchell's laugh was dry and bitter. "Old friend? When's the last time we talked, Bobby? Christmas card, birthday call, we've been strangers for 15 years. That doesn't answer my question." "Alex Sterling, 300 grand to remove an inconvenient husband." Mitchell's voice carried no emotion, as if he were discussing the weather. "Your wife's been keeping some interesting company." The words hit Bobby like a physical blow. He'd suspected Kate was unhappy, but this, "She knows." "Does it matter? She chose sides the moment she started fucking him. You're just collateral damage." Bobby felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Not rage, that would come later. This was the same icy clarity that had carried him through combat operations, the ability to compartmentalize emotion and focus on the mission. "So what now?" he asked. "You complete your contract or we settle this like men." Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, studying Bobby's face in the dim light filtering through the warehouse windows. "You know what the funny thing is? I gave you that warning because I thought you'd run. Figured you'd take the hint and disappear, maybe fake your own death. Would have made my job easier and kept my conscience clean. Sorry to disappoint you." "No," Mitchell said slowly. "I don't think you are. I think you want this to get messy. I think you want to hurt the people who hurt you." Bobby didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was as cold as a Portland winter. "What I want is justice. Sometimes that's messy." "Justice?" Mitchell tasted the word like wine. "Been a long time since I heard that word used seriously. All right, Captain. If you want justice, I've got a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "Your wife and her boyfriend think I completed my contract. Let's keep it that way. But instead of you ending up dead, how about we arrange for them to learn what betrayal really costs?" In the silence that followed, Bobby could hear rain beginning to fall on the warehouse roof. The same rain that had been falling the day he'd pulled Mitchell out of that Taliban kill zone. Some debts, he realized, could only be paid in full. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. Mitchell's smile was sharp as a blade. "Ever hear of a little place called Columbia? I know some people there who specialize in teaching rich boys about consequences." Chapter 4: The Dead Man's Hand. The blood had to look real. Bobby Thompson sat in his kitchen, watching William Mitchell mix theatrical gore with the practiced efficiency of a combat medic. It seemed fitting, somehow, that his fake death would be crafted by the man originally hired to make it real. Consistency is everything, Mitchell explained, adding cornstarch to thicken the mixture. Too thin and it looks like movie blood. Too thick and it's obviously fake. Has to pool right, spatter right, coagulate at the proper rate. Bobby nodded, studying the ballistics gel Mitchell had shaped to simulate an entry wound. The attention to detail was almost artistic, the precise angle of impact, the radiating fracture pattern, even the way the artificial blood would flow down the wall. Learned this in the Army. Nah, had a job in Hollywood before I went freelance. Turns out special effects and assassination have more in common than you'd think. Mitchell held up a photograph for comparison. Both require making people believe something that isn't real. They worked through the night, transforming Bobby's study into a crime scene that would convince any casual observer. The mannequin from the university theater department was positioned in Bobby's reading chair, dressed in his favorite flannel shirt, and positioned to match the shooting angle from the warehouse. When the desk lamp hit it just right, the silhouette was perfect. "Your wife's going to see this," Mitchell warned, adjusting the spray pattern of blood on the wall behind the chair. "That's something you can live with." Bobby's expression didn't change. She made her choice when she climbed into Sterling's bed. I'm just helping her live with the consequences. The forensic staging took 6 hours to complete. Every detail had to withstand scrutiny from Portland Police Bureau's crime scene unit, at least long enough for the initial assessment. Mitchell used his knowledge of ballistics to create powder burns at the correct distance, shell casings that would support the sniper theory, even trace evidence that would point investigators toward a professional hit. "There," Mitchell said, stepping back to admire their work. "One dead husband, courtesy of person or persons unknown." Bobby looked at the scene with professional detachment. The figure in the chair could easily be mistaken for him at first glance. Same build, same hair color, positioned the way he sat every evening with his book. The blood spatter told a story of sudden, violent death. Even knowing it was fake, the tableau was convincing. "What about the body?" Bobby asked. "Leave that to me. By the time the cops start asking hard questions, we'll be long gone." They activated the scene at 300 hours. Mitchell's rifle shot, fired from the warehouse position, shattered the study window and sent the mannequin tumbling to the floor. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood like a thunderclap, guaranteed to bring the police within minutes. Bobby was already 3 blocks away, jogging through Laurelhurst Park in dark clothing that would blend with the shadows. His truck was parked near the Burnside Bridge, loaded with a single duffel bag containing everything he needed for the next phase of their operation. By the time the first patrol car arrived at his house, he was invisible. Mitchell's phone rang at 3:47 hours, Sterling demanding confirmation. "It's done," Mitchell reported in his flat professional tone. "Clean shot, no complications. Target eliminated as requested." "Proof?" Sterling's voice was tight with anticipation. "Check the news in a few hours. Portland PD is already on scene." The media coverage began before sunrise. Retired Marine killed in apparent professional hit. Channel 8 News led with the story, their camera crews filming the crime scene tape and interviewing shocked neighbors. The coverage had everything Sterling would want to see: confirmation of death, police bafflement, no leads or suspects. Catherine Thompson's reaction was Academy Award material. She collapsed in the hospital waiting room when Detective Martinez delivered the news, sobbing into Sterling's shoulder while cameras captured her grief. The grieving widow, comforted by her husband's wealthy employer in her time of need. Portland's Society page would eat it up. "I can't stay here," she told Sterling later, dabbing her eyes with a tissue in front of the assembled reporters. "Every room, every memory. I need time to process this tragedy." Sterling's response was perfectly calibrated for the cameras. Kate needs space to grieve properly. I've offered her the use of my private residence in the Caribbean, somewhere she can find peace." "How generous," Detective Martinez observed dryly. He'd seen enough grieving widows to recognize one who was performing rather than feeling. But grief affected people differently, and the rich had their own ways of handling trauma. The paperwork moved quickly. With no body to examine, Mitchell had arranged for its disposal through contacts in the medical waste industry. The investigation focused on the crime scene evidence. Everything pointed to a professional assassination. The shot placement, the caliber of weapon, the clean entry and exit from the killer's position. "Classic sniper hit," the lead investigator told the Portland Tribune. Victim was illuminated in the window, making him an easy target from the abandoned warehouse across the street. Shooter was professional grade, knew exactly what he was doing. Meanwhile, Sterling was already making plans. "We'll take my jet to Nassau," he told Kate as they packed her belongings. "The house there has complete privacy, and you can take all the time you need to heal." Kate nodded mutely, playing her role to perfection. Inside, though, she was calculating. With Bobby gone, she was free to pursue the life Sterling offered. The insurance money alone would set her up comfortably, even before factoring in Sterling's wealth. It was tragic, certainly, but Bobby had never understood her need for something more than suburban mediocrity. What neither of them knew was that their Caribbean getaway would include some unexpected company. Bobby Thompson might be officially dead, but he was very much alive and planning a reunion that would redefine their understanding of consequences. The Gulfstream G650 lifted off from Portland International at 1800 hours, carrying Sterling and his grieving passenger toward what they believed would be their new life together. In the cargo hold, Kate's Louis Vuitton luggage nestled beside Sterling's briefcase full of offshore banking documents. But this flight would have a different destination than either passenger expected. Because sometimes the dead don't stay buried, and sometimes justice comes in forms that money can't buy. Chapter 5: The Long Fall Down. The private terminal at Nassau International had all the charm of a luxury mortuary, polished marble, hushed voices, and the kind of artificial tranquility that money bought by the yard. Catherine Thompson sat in the waiting area, her black Prada dress and oversized sunglasses playing the part of grieving widow to perfection. Beside her, Alexander Sterling checked his Patek Philippe and drummed manicured fingers against his Hermes briefcase. "Mechanical issues," the terminal manager explained with the practiced apologetic demeanor of someone accustomed to disappointing rich people. "Your aircraft developed hydraulic problems during pre-flight inspection. Nothing serious, but safety regulations require a full system check before departure." Sterling's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to his carefully orchestrated plans being derailed by mechanical failures. "How long?" 6 to 8 hours minimum. However, we can arrange alternate transportation. Smaller aircraft but fully certified and maintained to commercial standards. Kate reached over and squeezed Sterling's hand, playing her part in their public performance. "It's fine, Alex. After everything that's happened, a few hours don't matter." What mattered was that they were finally free. Bobby's death had been reported in the Portland Tribune that morning. A brief article about a retired Marine found shot in his home, police investigating possible professional assassination. Kate had read it twice, searching for any emotion other than relief and finding none. The replacement aircraft was a modest Cessna Citation, owned by Caribbean Charter Services, and piloted by a weathered man named Johnson who looked like he'd been flying these routes since the Wright brothers invented aviation. His co-pilot, a younger man with a military bearing, checked their documents with professional courtesy. "Flight time to Nassau will be approximately 47 minutes, Johnson announced as they settled into the cabin. "Weather looks good, should be a smooth ride." Kate barely listened. Through the small window, She watched the turquoise waters of the Caribbean spread below them like scattered jewelry. This was her new life beginning, no more rainy Portland winters, no more evenings spent listening to Bobby's war stories, no more pretending to be satisfied with suburban mediocrity. Champagne, the co-pilot offered, producing a bottle of Dom Perignon. Absolutely, Sterling smiled, his earlier irritation forgotten. We're celebrating new beginnings. 20 minutes into the flight, Kate noticed they were flying over dense jungle instead of the island-dotted seascape she'd expected. "Is this normal?" she asked, pointing out the window. "Slight course correction," Johnson called back from the cockpit. "Air traffic control directed us around some weather systems. Nothing to worry about." But Kate was beginning to worry. The jungle below looked endless, unmarked by any signs of civilization. This wasn't the route to Nassau that Sterling had shown her on his phone. Something was wrong. Sterling sensed it too. His business instincts, honed by years of hostile takeovers and corporate warfare, were screaming warnings. "Pilot," he called forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "I need to see our current position." "Coming up on our destination now, sir," Johnson replied calmly. Through the windscreen, Kate could see a rough airstrip carved from the jungle, surrounded by corrugated metal buildings and rusted equipment. This wasn't Nassau International. This wasn't even close to civilization. "What the hell is this?" Sterling was on his feet, moving toward the cockpit. "I didn't authorize any course changes. Turn this aircraft around immediately." The co-pilot stood up and Kate's blood froze. She knew that face, had seen it in the framed photographs on Bobby's nightstand. Younger, clean-shaven in the military portrait, but unmistakable. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," the man said, removing his pilot's cap. "Captain Robert Thompson, United States Marine Corps, retired, though I believe you know me better as your late wife's inconvenient husband." Kate's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the cabin floor. "That's impossible. You're dead. I saw the police reports the crime scene." "Death was greatly exaggerated," Bobby said, his voice carrying the same calm authority she remembered from their early years together. "Amazing what a good special effects budget can accomplish these days." Sterling's face had gone the color of old parchment. "This is kidnapping, when my lawyers—" "Your lawyers can't help you here, Alex." Bobby's smile was sharp as broken glass. "See, we're not in U.S. airspace anymore. Different rules apply where we're going." The Citation touched down on the rough strip with a jarring impact that rattled Kate's teeth. Through the windows, she could see armed men in jungle fatigues emerging from the buildings. Their weapons were military-grade, their movements professional. "Welcome to Colombia," Bobby announced as the engines wound down. "I'd like you to meet some old friends of mine." The cabin door opened, and William Mitchell climbed aboard. Kate had never seen him before, but his presence radiated the same lethal competence as Bobby. Behind him came a Hispanic man with a scarred face and dead eyes, someone who'd clearly done terrible things and slept well afterward. "Carlos Mendoza," Bobby made introductions with casual politeness. "Carlos runs a very successful import-export business down here, specializes in high-value commodities and customer service." "What kind of customer service?" Sterling demanded, though his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "The kind that teaches spoiled rich boys about consequences," Mitchell said. "Your family has deep pockets, Sterling. Carlos is betting they'll pay handsomely to get you back in one piece." Kate found her voice at last. "Bobby, please. You don't understand. I never wanted you hurt. When Alex told me about the contract, I tried to talk him out of it, but you didn't warn me." Bobby's eyes were colder than anything she'd ever seen. "You didn't call the police. You didn't do anything except plan your new life while I waited to die." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He pulled out his phone, swiped to a video file. This is security footage from Sterling's hotel in Vegas. Timestamp shows this was taken 6 hours after my supposed death. Want to see how hard you grieved? The footage showed Kate and Sterling in passionate embrace, celebrating in what they believed was complete privacy. Her moans of pleasure echoed in the small cabin as Bobby's supposed widow found comfort in her lover's arms. Touching, Mitchell observed. Nothing says grief like a victory fuck. Kate's face burned with shame and rage. You bastard! You orchestrated all of this, didn't you? The fake death, the flight here, you planned every detail. I learned from the best, Bobby nodded toward Mitchell. Turns out your boyfriend's hired killer had a guilty conscience. We came to a mutually beneficial arrangement. Sterling's business mind was still trying to process the situation. What do you want? Money. I can wire any amount. Carlos will handle the financial negotiations, Bobby cut him off. As for you, Kate, Carlos also handles other types of transactions. He knows people who appreciate beauty and aren't too particular about consent. The threat hit Kate like a physical blow. You can't. Bobby, whatever I did, I'm still your wife. Till death do us part, he quoted. I died yesterday, remember. The marriage ended when you watched them carry out my body and felt nothing but relief. Carlos stepped forward, his English heavily accented but perfectly clear. Time to go. My associates are waiting. As they were led from the aircraft at gunpoint, Kate tried one last desperate appeal. Bobby, I know you're angry, but this isn't you. You're not a killer. You're not like them. He paused at the cabin door, looking back at her with something that might have been pity. You're right. I'm not a killer, but I'm not the man you married anymore either. He died yesterday, along with his illusions about love and loyalty. The jungle heat was oppressive, filled with the sounds of insects and distant howling monkeys. Kate stumbled across the rough tarmac in her expensive heels, designer dress already wilting in the humidity. This wasn't how her new life was supposed to begin. Consider this my wedding gift to you, Bobby called after her. A chance to experience a different kind of life entirely. Hope it's everything you dreamed of. The metal doors of the holding facility clanged shut with finality. In the sudden darkness, Kate could hear Sterling whimpering like a frightened child. Outside, Bobby Thompson climbed back into the Citation and prepared to return to the land of the living. Some betrayals, he reflected, required creative punishment. Justice wasn't always served in courtrooms, and sometimes the guilty had to learn their lessons the hard way. As the aircraft lifted off into the Colombian sunset, Bobby felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Behind him, in a jungle compound hundreds of miles from anywhere, his wife and her lover were beginning to understand the true cost of their choices. Carlos Mendoza was a patient teacher, and his curriculum was both comprehensive and permanent. The dead, Bobby had learned, sometimes got the last laugh after all. Epilogue: What remains. 6 months later, Robert Thompson sat on the deck of his new house in the San Juan Islands, watching the sunset paint Puget Sound in shades of gold and crimson. The place was modest by billionaire standards, just 3 bedrooms and a view that money couldn't buy. But it was his, purchased with cash from an offshore account that William Mitchell had helped him establish. The Portland house had sold quickly after the insurance settlement. The new owners, a young couple with 2 kids, had no idea about its bloody history. Bobby hoped they'd be happier there than he'd been. His phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell, now officially retired from the assassination business and running a wilderness guide service in Alaska. Sterling family paid up, full amount. Carlos says your wife's learning Spanish real quick. Bobby deleted the message without responding. Some chapters of life needed to close completely, and revenge was a dish best served once. He'd gotten what he wanted: justice for their betrayal, and a chance to start over without the ghosts of his failed marriage. The Pacific Northwest Evening News was playing on his laptop, mostly background noise while he read. But one story caught his attention. International Task Force raids human trafficking ring in Colombia, several Americans among those rescued. The footage showed women being led from a jungle compound to waiting helicopters. In the chaos, Bobby thought he glimpsed a familiar face, older, thinner, but unmistakably Kate. If it was her, she'd learned firsthand what it meant to be trapped in a cage. He closed the laptop without watching the rest. Some stories didn't need endings, just distance. Down in the harbor, a ferry loaded with tourists was heading back to Anacortes, its wake spreading behind it like an arrowhead. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the dramas that played out in the shadows. Bobby envied them their innocence. He'd been a different man when this started, trusting, loyal, believing in the fundamental goodness of people he loved. That man had died in the warehouse, even if his funeral had been premature. What remained was something harder, more pragmatic, perhaps more honest about the world's true nature. The sunset was fading to purple when his doorbell rang. Bobby answered it carefully. Old habits died hard, but found only a delivery truck and a package from overseas. Inside was a small wooden box, carved in an intricate pattern he recognized from his deployment days. The note was brief. Some debts are paid in full. The rest is between you and whatever God you pray to. W.M. Inside the box, cushioned in black felt, lay two items, a bronze star medal and a wedding ring. The medal was his own, the one he'd earned pulling Mitchell out of that Taliban kill zone 15 years ago. The ring was Kate's, removed before her transfer to Carlos Mendoza's tender care. Bobby held the ring up to the dying light, remembering the day he'd placed it on her finger. They'd been so young then, so certain that love could overcome any obstacle. Time had proved them both wrong. He walked to the edge of his deck and threw the ring as far as he could into the dark water below. It disappeared without a sound, swallowed by depths that would keep it forever. The medal he placed on his mantle, next to a photograph of his old unit, 12 young men who'd trusted each other with their lives in a time when trust actually meant something. As full darkness settled over the islands, Bobby made himself a simple dinner and opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving. There was no one to share it with, but that was fine. He'd learned to enjoy his own company, to find peace in solitude rather than desperately seeking it in another person's arms. Tomorrow he'd start his new job at the Maritime Museum in Friday Harbor. Nothing dramatic, just giving tour and sharing stories about naval history with tourists and school groups. A quiet life for a man who'd seen enough excitement to last several lifetimes. The past was finished, buried as deeply as his fake death certificate. What remained was the future, and for the first time in years, Bobby Thompson looked forward to discovering what it might hold. Some men were born for grand gestures and epic passions. Others found their happiness in smaller things, honest work, peaceful evenings, and the knowledge that they'd faced betrayal and survived it with their honor intact. Outside his window, the lights of passing boats moved slowly across the water, each one carrying its own cargo of hopes and dreams and human complications. Bobby watched them until they disappeared into the darkness, then turned off his lights and went to bed. In his dreams, he flew again, not the cramped commuter planes of his civilian career, but the F-16 Falcons of his youth, climbing toward stars that seemed close enough to touch. In dreams, the sky was infinite and full of possibilities, and the man he'd been before betrayal taught him bitter lessons was still whole and believing in tomorrow. When he woke, he'd be older and wiser and alone. But tonight, in the space between sleeping and waking, Robert Thompson was young again and flying toward a horizon that promised everything and delivered just enough to keep a man hopping. Some stories end with violence, others with justice. The best ones, perhaps, end with the possibility of peace. The end.